I'm not here to preach and teach. And just like Brijesh Saab said, awareness is something that you can do to an extent, but beyond a point, it doesn't really work. Because I remember when COVID times came, everybody kept saying, wash your hands, use the sanitizer. But there is always a balance between how much you can tell people and how much people will adopt over a period of time. So essentially, in principle, what is multi-factor, isn't it? Multi-factor is something that you either have, or something that you are. And we see that on day-to-day basis in terms of logging onto websites, using our phones, and we're very familiar to this. So not trying to preach the choir, I know all of us know this, but it's important to set the context. But then why MFA? Yeah. So as the lady mentioned, the problem really starts with the password is what I believe as a practitioner. I think we have had passwords for a very long time. They're very costly to manage. They're difficult to maintain. And as our digital estate is growing, there is usually a unique password that is required for everything with its own complexities of have so many keywords and whatnot, decreasing the user experience. So there are so many fallacies behind having the password itself, which eventually is the baseline way of authenticating ourselves or putting ourselves inside into anything. Right? So if you really see the graph on the right, what it really kind of talks about is what is high security, low security, what is inconvenient and convenient. So the passwords actually sit sweetly on the convenient side, which is good to have. I think it has moved a little more left as the time has gone by because we need so many passwords to be remembered and it's not always easy. But then what's high security and convenient is possibly the future, which is the passwordless authentication. Yeah. But where we are right now is a combination of high security, but a little bit inconvenient in terms of usability or the user experience, which is multi-factor itself. Typical two factors that we see could be an OTP on your phone, could be an app and so forth. Again, since we have this problem, what are the typical risks? And I've tried to pull out 3 humble risks. I feel like you would be already aware about, just trying to sum it up for you. So in terms of identity attacks, what's happening is, if you see in the previous slide, it said more than 81% of the attacks eventually end up using some sort of credentials. So if you apply a simple 80-20 rule, just like we probably apply a lot in our lives, you will see if we can take care of this password problem, we can be hopeful that a lot of the obvious problems may not manifest eventually to bigger ones. So what's really happening is, we are using identities to attack systems. Soon as typical concept or the agenda is to go and phish, whether it's social engineering, whether it's an email attack, spear phishing, could be anything, leading to a credential theft and eventually leading to a data exfiltration. This is the modus operandi for as long as I can think and imagine in my life. Today, we don't need humans to do this. Yeah, so there are professional organizations and there are enough tools. Like Sir was mentioning, now there are call centers to support. You can buy ransomware as a service, pay for a pay-as-you-go model, and how many zombies, how many bots you want to infect, and they will help you. Similarly, there are actually things out there which are available free source now. You don't even need to pay for it. For example, Deadstar, GoFetch, these are all available on GitHub. You try, if you want to play around with some of the things, you can go and automate all of these breaches. You don't even need to do anything manually. It's a script running. When something breaks through, all you will get is a prompt and then you can get into action. So this is how advanced the adversaries are. So this is what we are playing against. That's a play field that we have in front of us. What they are, of course, after is privileged users, partners, customers, standard users. Yeah. So earlier, if you see, the landscape pretty much was privileged users and standard users. And this is because how technology is evolved. Now, today, nobody can be successful until they collaborate. We just heard about the government or nation-state collaboration or inter-country collaboration. But think of a simple business. If I am an organization or you're an organization, you would have partners, you would have suppliers, something as simple as a cloud data center provider. Things like your technology stacks, your telcos. So they would fall in some sort of B2B, B2C cases. But whether we monitor them and look at their identity as well or not is a big question. Because what is inside your organization, I think we all focus very well. But sometimes when it's a partner or a vendor, the governance over those identities may or may not be as well. And I'm not looking for an answer, but hand on heart, everybody knows what the realities are, where the pitfalls are in the industry. So, and to sum it up, yeah, so everything really depends upon the integrity of the identity. The moment the integrity or the key is gone, it's a game over. So essentially, is password enough to protect identities? I guess we came a long way in answering this, and the industry has been successful in using some sort of multi-factor authentication or several other means of authentication, which can essentially bolster or kind of confirm that whoever is trying to authenticate is the person who's trying to authenticate, isn't it? So what's really happening is, as phishing is happening, and I'm actually going to blow up this chart, what it really shows you is, if you, there was a study done by for 800 million, I know it's down here, hence I'm reading it. So there were over 800 million compromises which were assessed, and the passwords that were involved in it. So the interesting fact in this data graphic is that if you see, 78% of the passwords were NIST compliant, 59% were PCI compliant, 57% high trust compliant, and as most of us are practitioners here, you would see all of them at least enforce the 8-character or sometimes 10-character standard lengths. Do not set a maximum password length or a password complexity with alphanumeric characters and whatnot. And if something happens, what would be? Yeah, so essentially, the problem that I was talking about, are passwords enough, I think is manifesting itself. That probably the clear short answer is the password clearly is not enough. Yeah, because until and unless there is another factor to validate, it's going to give us a problem. And the biggest out there is that it's not the systems which are getting breached. Yeah, it's the human which is getting breached, which we'll talk about in a minute. And the risk 3 is the perimeterless identity. So what's happening is, as I was dwelling upon in my previous point, I think the identities and the infrastructure today is all boundaryless, and we have heard this term enough times, I'm not going to repeat it. But what's important to understand here is that the identities now are outside. So there is a proliferation. If you really see how we had done cybersecurity in the past, was a simple concept called defense in depth. And I've been with service providers throughout my life. And I used to tell my customers, how you do all right, we have this defense in depth, this is your outer perimeter, then this is how it is, this is the DMZ zone, and you would keep putting it down like a peel of an onion. Like, here is another layer, here's another layer, and try to give them confidence that hopefully one of these defenses will catch us. This is how warfares were, right? We have all heard of the Chuck reviews and whatnot. There were several layers of defenses. Now, what do you put the defense around these days? That's becoming a big question, and becoming a big challenge for us as practitioners as well. So what it really shows is, in middle is the old perimeter, where you could really put a boundary around things, which were either endpoints or servers or apps or data centers. Now, none of that really exists, especially after COVID with remote employees. So as people are working from home, probably their endpoint is one logical perimeter that we have, and we need to then probably lean heavily upon identities. Hence, this problem is getting manifested a lot. That said, is multi-factor authentication a boon or a bane? I think we have heard enough cases of why it is a boon. I'm happy to receive a OTP or something on my app. I think it gives me a lot of comfort. It gives me a feeling that, all right, hopefully nobody else is accessing this just because my password is breached. And by the way, we all know there are so many sites out there you can go and test your password on and see if it was ever breached. I can tell you, even on my Apple device now has this new feature. I think it came back like 2 iOS versions back, which looks into your password hashes and tells you if this password was involved in a breach previously. And I can tell you there were some of my passwords which are there. Did I change it? To be honest, not every one of them. Yeah. Don't judge me as a security practitioner, but I'm happy that there is a multi-factor authentication which kind of is protecting me out there. So is it a boon? I think it's clearly a boon. Is it a bane? And I think there's a strong case for it coming out. We recently saw cases where things as large as Uber's, Microsoft, Cisco's, and people who put a lot of money in this got breached. Was it really a password problem? In short, yes. Did they do enough to possibly avoid it? Possibly they did. They did have multi-factor authentication systems. So what went wrong? Yeah, it was a human. So what we really saw, at least in some of these cases, was what we know as the MFA push scam, right? And this is the hot new tactic for our adversaries at this point of time. So what you see on the right is a lot of our organizations have implemented this 2-factor where you can simply go and deny or approve a request. And what happened in all 3 of them was the adversaries were consistent. They probably had a bot deployed who kept pushing these notifications, and somebody just got tired and said, you know what, that's probably me. Or somebody is just trying to authenticate, and in the meanwhile, adversary puts a notification, they just click approve. So there you go, game over. Yeah, that was the reason behind one of these. But in coming here and talking to practitioners, I just didn't want to kind of talk about the problem, but also come up with a few recommendations of what we saw in some of these. Yeah. So what's important to see is that if you see a lot of these MFA fatigue or spam attacks, or you see a barrage of them, don't try and trust the people who are claiming to be your IT help desk or somebody reaching out to you on WhatsApp. It's all psychology, right? Anybody who's trying to create an urgency, there is usually a reason to suspect them. So be on the guard, right? Then if you, let's say there's another feature now, or it probably has existed for long, but versus what you are seeing on your mobile. So if somebody else probably has a self chance of a 3 or a 4, so it depends on how many numbers get generated. And for instance, I have a bank in ICICI bank, and every time I'm trying to do a print, there's a grid on the back of the card. Again, we have been seeing these number challenge responses for long. I think it's a beautiful way of implementing in terms of two-factor as well. Again, another suggestion or best practice that I learned about while talking to the CISOs is that something else that is getting adopted a lot is that if you see a lot of these requests coming through, try and limit them. We all have remembered that if we enter a password wrong for a number of times, the accounts would get logged out. But are we really doing it for multi-factor authentication requests in our organizations? If we are, great job. If we aren't, maybe it's a very small thing which doesn't need investment. Just a policy setting change and there you go. You limit the number of requests. If you still get something, lock the account out, raise the alert to the SOC and let somebody investigate. Because some of these very, very simple things can save these large ones, some of these embarrassments that we see. And I'm not trying to badger them. I'm part of the same profession. But essentially, it's all about keeping up with the game and making sure that we know what adversaries are doing. And this is the biggest thing. What is the human factor in all of this? Yeah, so there is a human factor involved in all multi-factor. What we just saw was that it wasn't technology which really failed, or maybe was not the best adoption, because technology will keep increasing. Adversaries will keep changing their tactics, and we'll have to keep evolving and keep adapting to how we respond to it. Yeah. So people are a complicated, species. So we like to think that we have given a yearly refresher training to everybody in the office, or just in time small bites of those email refreshers, SMS refreshers and whatnot. But you open your laptop, you see an email from your boss, he's upset, and then everything else goes for a toss. Yes. And then you get into some sort of pressure and you make mistakes. And it happens to all of us, happens to the best of us. We have seen enough examples around the world. So is there a clear solution? Possibly not, is what we have come to consensus. That's what we heard from a previous speaker as well, that there is no clear solution by just saying, I'm going to do more awareness. You can do as much awareness as you want, it just takes one. And I'm going to again pick back the COVID example. We can tell everybody don't shake hands, etc. In the beginning, I think I would still make a mistake of extending my hand. And sometimes the other person out of courtesy would, and then you realize, did we do the right thing? So at least this was getting in front of our head because we knew so much about it. So do we stop doing awareness? Believe not, right? So we continue going down that path, because no matter how much we tell, it's always less. So I think we can always keep telling. It's just like dealing with our children. You got to keep giving them these instructions in different manners over a period of time. So I think human will remain a factor in some of these, and we've got to kind of continue looking at this. Again, I saw an interesting survey, and I've quoted the source at the back end. It says more than 40% of the organizations found that their people were not reporting incidents. See, this is another problem. We've got to figure out easier and better means of enabling incident reporting. And it has to be multi-channel. A lot of organizations today still use only web-based, let's say. There is a form out there. There should be an ability to call in the help desk through a chat or through a bot, or reach out to the SOC if you think the incident is severe enough. And possibly some of these things can then be stopped in much sooner in the kill chain, if you will. So as the adversary is trying to attack, you can catch them right at the beginning and try to stop things from happening. And I'm not going to take too much time as well. So what's the landscape out there, right? Again, don't like to quote my own sources because my own research may not be as credible, but let's say Forbes saw that 74% actually start with a credential abuse. We saw earlier research say 81%. So you see the number is still between 75 to 81, so it's not far. So this, again, I'm trying to apply the 80-20. So it looks like this is a very, very real problem. Yeah. But what we have seen in the past was we had passwords only, and we saw all of these. You will still see a lot of articles. And I heard the reference of Indian apps. We just saw the big basket one, right? And essentially what we saw was Big Basket 1 was the password I think that a lot of people were using, which was quite surprising. But this was a news article that I read. But then we've seen these QRTs, the passwords I love you, password 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm guilty of using one 20 years back. I mean, I can tell you that. I think a lot of us. I remember when my router was installed by one of the ISPs, leading ISP in India still exists. The admin password was admin. So I don't know how good or bad it was, but I think this is how it used to be. Then we moved a little better towards having some sort of password plus, let's say, SMS or a voice authentication. And even better what we see today in terms of push notifications, software-based OTPs or hardware tokens, which is pretty good. But I guess what we are really moving towards is eventually biometric. Not so easy to breach. Again, everything in the word. So I think this hacking and all of this adversaries is not a new problem. Yeah, it's just evolved digitally. We have always had people who were trying to loot stuff out of places, who were trying to go up to the crown jewels, if you will. So it just depends upon the motivation and the amount of benefit that they eventually get out of it, and they will go after it. So can biometric be breached? Yes, it can be breached. Is it easy? It's extremely difficult, very cost intensive. So if I were an adversary, I would rather go after these two targets than try and attack that. So the more we can go towards some of these things, I think it's always better. From an authenticator standpoint, let's say if you do a authenticated phone sign-on, when we know that this device itself is authenticated and not just like, I see a lot of my banks today immediately tell that either I don't have my SIM switched on and they won't let me access my mobile app. I was traveling just last week and I was not in India. And my primary phone is a Jio phone, which is a prepaid phone for some reason. And I realized that I couldn't switch it on and I couldn't access my bank because it said that you don't have a SIM connection. I had a valid Wi-Fi and everything. That's pretty nice. We need to do things like that. FIDO2 security keys, don't like to endorse vendors, but we see a lot of YubiKey doing a lot of development in this area just as a practitioner, saying that don't personally use them, but something that we really ought to think about. And with that, can passwordless be the future? I was asked to kind of talk about where the future is heading. So here are some of my thoughts of how I thought about it. So are there benefits to it? There clearly are benefits to it. For example, it reduces IT time and costs. I said in the beginning that passwords are difficult to manage. They're, it's costly to manage. You have to reset them. Somebody calls in, whatnot. But biometric or typical some sort of, passwordless technology is something that the user drives. It's not something so much as a technology drives it. Yeah. So that's always easy on IT. It's definitely a stronger security posture. So we saw that 75%, 81% the problem for all the attacks is password. And if we take that out, what are we really taking out? And some of the examples are, think of phishing, think of stolen and weak passwords, password reuses. All of these threats really kind of go out of the scenario. Last but not the least, improves user experience. It is believed that average user at least has 35 to 45 passwords. I can relate to it. And I can tell you, I use a lot of passwords manager to manage them because it's becoming impossible to remember them in the head. So if that's the good, what are the things that may not go right? Poor identity proofing. Yeah? So essentially, once you accept a biometric ID, it usually, the way it's accepted in the systems is, it is believed to be true. So it kind of, system just accepts it. And if that is not proofed correctly, so the first time entry itself, if somebody gets access to your workflow, or if somebody enrolls a wrong ID and the other person doesn't detect, all that time of exposure of window becomes a challenge. And this is something that is becoming very, very difficult in cases of federation. So if you're federating with your third parties, with your vendors out there, this is a real challenge you're seeing in the industry. Another problem is fallback to passwords. A lot of you may be using Face ID or technology like that on your phones itself, so everybody is aware. If your biometric fails, it immediately falls back to a password, which is not typically secure. So if you see a phone PIN password, it usually can be breached very, very easily, and there are so many cases out there, so many tools out there which can break them. However, if you have a biometric working, awesome. The moment it fails back, if you don't have a mechanism outside of just that single factor of a PIN or a password, may not be the best thing again. So if there has to be some sort of hybrid authentication there. Complex and hybrid IT environments, again, if you have legacy systems, etc., biometric won't be supported. And the core of it, most financial systems, bank systems, you'll see may or may not support, at least at the back end. So where the crown jewels lie, where the privileged users are, where the administrators are, would not be supporting some of these. Yeah. So I wanted to leave you with some of the thoughts of how multi-factor is progressing, what are the goods and bads, what is the human factor in it. And with that, I thank you for your time, and it's been a pleasure being here with you.